When Senator John Kennedy begins his questioning, he enters a hearing room not merely as an investigator seeking clarity, but as a seasoned political performer well aware of the cameras, the audience, and emotional triggers embedded in American political culture. His tone, mannerisms, word choices, and the deliberate pacing of his interrogation are not coincidences. They are part of a broader strategy, one rooted in the understanding that congressional hearings have evolved into a hybrid medium, half governance, half political theater. In this opening portion of the exchange, Kennedy positions himself as a guardian of public morality, the no-nonsense truth seeker supposedly challenging institutional power. Yet beneath the surface, his approach is less about the pursuit of verifiable truth and more about shaping how viewers interpret a complex web of legal, political, and historical events. He begins with what appears to be a straightforward law and order question regarding a Wisconsin state judge accused of interfering with a federal immigration detainment. On paper, this situation is purely procedural, a legal dispute regarding jurisdiction, authority, and protocol. But Kennedy frames the moment through a moral dichotomy, lawful obedience versus lawless defiance. He presses Patel with questions designed to elicit one-word answers, the type of testimony that fits neatly into sound bites. The viewer at home is not given nuance. Instead, they are given a simple framework. Federal enforcement is righteous, and those who resist are inherently suspicious. Kennedy's goal is not factual complexity, but narrative clarity. By setting the judge's actions against a black and white backdrop, he presents the situation as emblematic of a broader pattern. States undermining federal authority for ideological reasons. This, in turn, feeds directly into ongoing political debates around immigration. In reality, legal disputes between state and federal authority are neither new nor inherently scandalous. They are a foundational part of Federalist design. Courts, state officials, and federal agents negotiate these boundaries constantly. Yet Kennedy selectively strips away this context, so that the moment can stand alone as evidence of ideological rebellion. It is a tactic that resonates with audiences already conditioned to view immigration enforcement through the lens of crisis, betrayal, and political sabotage. And by compelling Patel to reaffirm the senator's conclusions with brief, affirming responses, he transforms a witness from an independent figure with expertise into a narrative accessory. This opening sequence is critical because it sets the tone for everything that follows. It demonstrates Kennedy's preference for framing over fact-finding, and it reveals how hearings can be used as messaging vehicles rather than oversight mechanisms. Instead of building toward a genuine investigation that might help the public understand complexities of federal-state dynamics, Kennedy uses the first topic as a foundational block for a larger story he intends to weave, a story about institutions failing the American people, about ideological corruption, and about selective enforcement of rules. Kennedy's rhetorical approach is rooted in the logic of political storytelling rather than legal inquiry. His questions are not structured to extract new information. They are structured to reinforce conclusions he has already drawn. For viewers unfamiliar with the underlying legal case, the simplicity of the exchange may appear compelling. This is the power of narrative framing. When the complexity of real-world governance is reduced to digestible moral contrasts, the audience is guided toward emotional certainty rather than intellectual understanding. It is also notable that Kennedy does not allow broader institutional explanations to enter the conversation. He does not ask about the legal nuances of the judge's decision, the procedural details, the specific statutes involved, or the broader implications for federalism. Instead, he presents the issue as a clear-cut example of defiance. By doing so, he primes viewers to interpret the entire hearing as a referendum on institutional decay. The Wisconsin judge becomes a symbol, not a case study. She becomes proof of the senator's pre-existing thesis, rather than a subject of investigation in her own right. Patel, seated across from him, is drawn into this dynamic willingly or otherwise. By answering directly and without elaboration, he becomes an integral part of the framing. Whether intentional or not, his brevity amplifies the senator's narrative structure. His role in these early moments is not to challenge the framing or provide context, but to validate the moral storyline Kennedy is constructing. In political hearings, the witness's cooperation, whether active or passive, can significantly strengthen the senator's message. Here, Patel's straightforward confirmation serves as a reinforcement mechanism. Each yes, senator, creates a rhythmic cadence, a pattern of affirmation that signals to viewers that their suspicions have been verified by an insider. In this way, the hearing transforms from an exercise in oversight into what communication scholars call a narrative cascade. A narrative cascade occurs when political actors use selective facts, simplified storytelling, and emotional framing to guide public interpretation of an event or issue. Once initiated, the cascade does not rely on comprehensive evidence, but on the momentum created by repeated reinforcement. Kennedy's opening segment is structured precisely in this manner: a controlled buildup, a narrowing of complexity, and the deployment of symbolic actors who fit into a larger storyline he will expand upon in the subsequent topics about the FBI, about intelligence officials, about Hunter Biden, and even about Jeffrey Epstein. This is why the first segment matters so deeply. It is not just an introduction. It is the philosophical grounding for the entire hearing. Through tone, structure, and selective questioning, Kennedy defines the stakes: a world where federal institutions are failing, where ideological biases undermine justice, where political enemies manipulate systems to protect themselves, and where only vigilant conservatives are willing to expose the truth. Whether one agrees or disagrees with this worldview, what matters is understanding how carefully and deliberately it is constructed. Rather than beginning with a neutral question or a broad policy concern, Kennedy starts with a case designed to evoke suspicion and moral clarity. This positions him as an advocate for accountability even before the more explosive topics arise later in the hearing. It is a method calculated to build audience trust in the senator's conclusions before they are even presented. By the time he transitions into older scandals about the FBI and politically charged investigations, his audience is already primed to believe the worst. The psychological groundwork has been laid. This opening section sets the foundation for the larger critique contained in the full script. That congressional hearings, often portrayed as venues for truth-seeking, are frequently stages for political storytelling. Stories that rely on selective detail, emotional provocation, and calculated timing. Kennedy's method exemplifies how political actors use hearings not necessarily to discover truth, but to shape public belief, reinforce ideological identities, and influence the national narrative surrounding institutions, elections, and governance itself. As Senator Kennedy transitions from the Wisconsin judge to the topic of Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the tone of the hearing shifts noticeably. No longer confined to a recent legal dispute, he reaches back into one of the most politically charged episodes of the past decade, an episode that has already been investigated, reviewed, scrutinized, and litigated across multiple institutions. Yet Kennedy resurrects it with deliberate intensity. His strategy is clear: to remind audiences of a familiar narrative, one that conservative media has repeated for years. In doing so, he taps into a reservoir of public memory that still carries emotional force, particularly among voters who believe federal institutions acted with partisan bias during the 2016 election cycle. The Strzok-Page storyline, involving personal text messages exchanged between two officials who were romantically involved, has long been employed as symbolic evidence of institutional corruption. For Kennedy, these individuals become archetypes rather than people, stand-ins to the idea that the federal government was weaponized against Donald Trump. He methodically replays the same lines that have been broadcast repeatedly across political commentary programs, quoting the infamous text messages with theatrical emphasis. His tone is almost prosecutorial, not because he is uncovering new wrongdoing, but because he is reenacting a narrative that he knows is politically potent. Kennedy's decision to revisit those specific texts, will stop it, is not accidental. These words hold a mythic status in some circles, functioning almost like a scriptural reference in political discourse. By reciting them aloud, he performs a ritual of reactivation, summoning old feelings and reigniting old grievances. Even though official investigations concluded that personal political opinions did not materially affect the FBI's decision-making processes, Kennedy does not dwell on those findings. Instead, he isolates the most inflammatory details. This selective recall is a powerful rhetorical strategy. It gives the audience emotional certainty without requiring them to reconsider the broader context. In this moment, Patel's role becomes even more crucial. His succinct confirmations, delivered without elaboration, nuance, or correction, create the illusion that Kennedy's portrayal is factually airtight. A more exhaustive explanation from the witness might have complicated the narrative, but Patel's compliance helps streamline it. The exchange mimics the structure of a courtroom scene, where the senator appears to be revealing the truth through interrogation, even though the truth being presented has already been adjudicated in multiple governmental reviews. The lack of pushback invites viewers to accept Kennedy's interpretation as definitive. This portion of the hearing also demonstrates how political figures use selective memory to shape contemporary debate. By reviving Strzok and Page, Kennedy symbolically revives the entire ecosystem of suspicion surrounding the FBI's involvement in the 2016 election. He does not need new evidence. He relies on the audience's prior familiarity. The power of this tactic lies in repetition. When a narrative is repeated often enough, it becomes emotionally real, even if its factual underpinnings are complex or disputed. Kennedy's focus on the settlement amounts paid to Strzok and Page is another example of this curated outrage. The senator frames the monetary figure as a moral indictment, implying that the government rewarded individuals who supposedly interfered in the election. Yet he does not explore the legal reasons for the settlement, the procedural norms that guide employment disputes, or the independent review processes that may have compelled the government to settle in the first place. Those complexities would interfere with the simpler interpretation he aims to cultivate, that the system protects its own at the expense of justice. His insistence on identifying the precise decision-maker behind the settlement, pressing Patel to name Attorney General Merrick Garland, serves a dual purpose. First, it personalizes the accusation, pointing to a specific political figure rather than an institution. Second, it strategically links a contemporary Democratic official to an older narrative of supposed anti-Trump bias. This creates continuity between past grievances and current politics, sustaining a storyline that extends from 2016 to the present. To the audience, it may seem as though a single thread of misconduct runs through multiple administrations, all pointing in the same ideological direction. Kennedy's questioning is designed to reinforce that impression. This tactic, connecting disparate events across time, illustrates how political storytellers create overarching narratives. Individual controversies may fade, but when they're tied together, they shape a broader worldview, one in which institutions are infiltrated by ideological adversaries, where accountability is selectively enforced, and where conservatives are unfairly targeted by bureaucratic actors. Kennedy's treatment of Strzok and Page is not about resolving a past scandal. It is about using the past to justify present suspicions. Importantly, Kennedy does not address the official findings that contradicted his framing. Multiple reports, including those produced under the Trump administration, concluded that while the agents exhibited political bias in private communications, their actions did not materially alter investigative decisions. Such nuance would complicate the senator's moral dichotomy. The hearing is not structured to include that nuance. Instead, it functions as a performance, a reenactment designed to reinforce ideological certainty. This segment of the exchange highlights how congressional hearings can serve as repositories for political memory. They allow lawmakers to resurface old stories with renewed urgency, framing them as unresolved injustices that demand public attention. The audience, hearing these stories invoked in an official setting, may interpret them as evidence of ongoing institutional failure, even if the cases have been closed. This practice contributes to a political culture in which trust in institutions erodes not because of new wrongdoing, but because old controversies are kept alive indefinitely. Ultimately, the Strzok-Page segment of the hearing reveals Kennedy's deeper communicative objective: to construct a narrative ecosystem in which past grievances justify present distrust. Through selective quotation, emotional emphasis, and strategic omission, he transforms a concluded internal investigation into a centerpiece of contemporary skepticism. Patel's cooperation, whether strategic or passive, reinforces the senator's framing, creating an echo chamber within the official proceedings themselves. In doing so, Kennedy invites viewers to see the federal government not as a collection of independent institutions governed by law, but as a monolithic political actor driven by ideological loyalty. The effectiveness of this technique lies not in factual revelation, but in narrative continuity. By reintroducing Strzok and Page into the public conversation, he is not simply revisiting history. He is repurposing it. When Senator Kennedy shifts from Strzok and Page to the subject of the Hunter Biden laptop story, He enters one of the most polarizing media and political controversies of the last decade. This transition is not random. It is designed to deepen the pattern he has been constructing since the start of the hearing. Each topic he raises builds on the same underlying theme: the idea that federal agencies, intelligence officials, and media institutions coordinate to shield certain political figures from scrutiny while aggressively targeting others. By the time Kennedy reaches the Hunter Biden narrative, the groundwork has already been laid. His audience has been primed to accept the senator's framing without hesitation, because the emotional logic of suspicion has been reinforced through the previous segments. The laptop saga is a uniquely potent political symbol. It combines elements of scandal, foreign influence, media integrity, institutional trust, and partisan conflict. Kennedy does not attempt to disentangle these threads or analyze the complexities involved. Instead, he compresses the entire controversy into a single storyline. Federal authorities had the laptop for months, knew it wasn't disinformation, yet allowed a group of prominent intelligence officials to publicly cast doubt on its authenticity prior to the 2020 election. The story, as Kennedy tells it, becomes a narrative of intentional suppression, an orchestrated attempt to mislead voters for political gain. This framing is effective because it relies on emotional simplicity. The senator portrays a clear sequence of events. The New York Post published the initial report. Intelligence figures dismissed it. The public doubted it, and federal agencies supposedly remained silent despite knowing the truth. Kennedy avoids addressing the broader context: the swirling disinformation landscape of 2020, the legitimate fears of foreign influence operations, the media's caution, and the internal debates within government agencies. These complexities do not serve a narrative he aims to construct, so they are omitted. What remains is a stark picture of deliberate concealment. One of Kennedy's most calculated moves is invoking the names of well-known intelligence officials: Clapper, Brennan, Panetta, Hayden. These figures carry symbolic weight. To conservative audiences, they are often associated with the national security establishment that critics describe as the so-called deep state. By listing them in quick succession, Kennedy activates memories of past controversies tied to these individuals. He transforms them from signatories of a letter into characters in a continuing political drama. The implication is that the same people who were involved in earlier disputes reappeared at a decisive political moment, this time to shield a Democratic candidate's family. In this retelling, the question Kennedy poses to Patel, who in the FBI refused to let the FBI tell the American people the truth, is not a request for factual clarity. It is a rhetorical device. He knows Patel cannot provide such a name on the spot, but the question itself implies that such a person exists, that there was a conscious decision, that a cover-up was coordinated. The absence of a name becomes evidence of secrecy rather than a reflection of procedural or bureaucratic complexity. The question leads the audience to imagine a hidden actor within the agency who prevented disclosure, reinforcing suspicions of institutional bias. Patel's response, stating that he does not have a name in front of him, plays into Kennedy's hands. The senator presses further, insisting on a name, not a division, as though the specificity of the answer would unlock a hidden truth. This insistence transforms the exchange into a symbolic hunt, an attempt to unmask the faceless bureaucrat supposedly responsible for misleading the public. Kennedy knows full well that most decisions involving sensitive investigations are not made by a single individual, nor are they easily dissected in a hearing. But the performance is not about procedural accuracy. It is about creating the impression that accountability is being obstructed. This is where Kennedy's genius as a political storyteller becomes most apparent. He uses uncertainty as a narrative advantage. The less definitive information Patel provides, the more Kennedy can imply. Vagueness becomes evidence. Silence becomes confirmation. The audience is encouraged to fill in the gaps with suspicion. It is a technique often used in political rhetoric. Highlight ambiguity, imply wrongdoing, and leave the rest to the listener's imagination. The laptop episode also functions as a tool for rewriting recent political history. By suggesting that the story was intentionally suppressed before the election, Kennedy invites audiences to reconsider the legitimacy of political outcomes, not just past or present ones. This questioning of narrative legitimacy can have profound effects on democratic trust. It suggests not only that political actors behave improperly, but that entire electoral processes are shaped by coordinated misinformation or suppression by elite institutions. Kennedy's pivot to the laptop story also serves another strategic purpose. It positions conservative skepticism as justified and ongoing. If audiences believe that institutions withheld the truth during a pivotal election cycle, they are more likely to accept future claims of institutional corruption. They are also more likely to distrust future investigations, media reports, and official statements. Kennedy is not just revisiting a past controversy. He is cultivating a mindset that will influence how audiences perceive unfolding political events. The senator's method mirrors a broader trend in modern political communication, converting complexity into narrative cohesion. The Hunter Biden story is one of the most complicated political media intersections in recent memory, involving questions about digital forensics, chain of custody, foreign disinformation strategies, internal agency protocols, and journalistic standards. Yet Kennedy collapses all these dimensions into a simple formula. They lied. This reduction makes the story accessible and emotionally resonant even for those who may not have followed the details closely. Patel's compliance once again reinforces the senator's approach. As the self-identified lead investigator on Russiagate matters, Patel carries symbolic credibility for audiences predisposed to distrust federal institutions. His agreement with Kennedy's premises, even when brief and unelaborated, creates the appearance of insider validation. It is a powerful combination. The senator as a public advocate for truth, and Patel as the insider confirming the senator's narrative contours. This portion of the hearing also illustrates how political actors repurpose scandals across multiple election cycles. The laptop story, like the Strzok page text, is not being discussed to provide new information. It is being used as a political instrument to reframe the broader conversation about institutional trust, media bias, and electoral integrity. The hearing becomes a stage where old grievances are revived, refreshed, and redeployed. Ultimately, Kennedy's approach in this segment reveals much about the increasing convergence between congressional hearings and political messaging ecosystems. The Hunter Biden narrative is no longer merely a story about an individual's laptop. It is a metaphor for perceived institutional betrayal. As Senator Kennedy moves from the Hunter Biden laptop to the topic of Jeffrey Epstein's death, the hearing takes a sudden but highly strategic turn. This shift may seem abrupt, almost jarring, but it serves a deliberate rhetorical purpose. Epstein's name evokes immediate public fascination, a blend of conspiracy, scandal, and mistrust that transcends traditional party lines. By inserting Epstein into a sequence of politically loaded topics, Kennedy taps into one of the most widely known and widely speculated incidents in recent memory. The effect is to fuse mainstream doubt with partisan suspicion, creating a powerful atmosphere of institutional skepticism. Kennedy does not elaborate on the details of Epstein's case. He does not need to. The very mention of Epstein functions as a narrative accelerant. It reinforces the idea that powerful people can evade accountability, that institutions hide uncomfortable truths, and that justice is selectively applied depending on one's status and connections. These themes mirror the grievances Kennedy has been constructing throughout the hearing. Elites protect their own, institutions conceal the truth, and ordinary citizens are left in the dark. By invoking Epstein, Kennedy binds his earlier arguments to a cultural touchstone that resonates far beyond political boundaries. One of the most striking aspects of this segment is how Kennedy frames his question. Instead of asking about procedural details or investigative updates, he poses a stark, binary inquiry. Did Jeffrey Epstein hang himself, or did somebody kill him? This framing is intentionally provocative. It is designed to evoke the most sensational interpretations of the incident. The senator presents a question as though the answer is simple and knowable, even though the case is fraught with layers of complexity, conflicting reports, and widespread speculation. By reducing the issue to two mutually exclusive possibilities, Kennedy turns a complex situation into a dramatic moment of implied conspiracy. Patel's response is predictable and entirely procedural. He states the official conclusion: Epstein died by suicide. But the answer does not extinguish the suspicion. In fact, Kennedy's abrupt interjection after Patel's response, "Are you going to release all the information about that?" reveals that the senator is less interested in the official finding than in highlighting the perceived lack of transparency. His questioning is engineered to amplify mistrust, to suggest that something is being hidden, even if Patel cannot confirm such an implication. This exchange shows how political actors use sensational topics to amplify credibility gaps. In the public imagination, the Epstein case represents a moment when institutional narratives failed to satisfy collective doubts. Conspiracy theories flourish not only because of political motivations, but because of circumstances themselves. High-profile connections, mysterious events, unusual procedural lapses created fertile ground for skepticism. Kennedy leverages this environment of doubt, using it to cast shadows on everything else he has discussed in the hearing. If institutions could mishandle or obscure details about Epstein's death, the implication goes, how can they be trusted in other politically sensitive matters? Kennedy's quip, "Will you have it done before I die?" is not merely comedic relief. It is a rhetorical device aimed at reinforcing the perception that government transparency is perpetually delayed, obstructed, or manipulated. The humor carries an edge of cynicism, one that resonates deeply with viewers who already feel alienated from institutional authority. Humor, in political communication, often functions as a tool for embedding critique in a more palatable form. Kennedy's remark allows viewers to laugh at institutional dysfunction, while simultaneously adopting the underlying suspicion that government agencies move too slowly or intentionally conceal the truth. Patel attempts to respond responsibly, referencing privacy concerns and ongoing coordination with the Department of Justice. But his careful phrasing is no match for the emotional narrative Kennedy is building. Procedural explanations rarely satisfy public appetite for certainty, especially when the topic carries cultural mystique. In a moment like this, the facts become secondary to the emotional undertone. Kennedy's goal is not to uncover new information. It is to shape the atmosphere around the hearing, encouraging audiences to view all institutional statements with skepticism. This use of Epstein as a rhetorical pivot illustrates a broader technique in political messaging: anchoring. Anchoring occurs when a speaker introduces a powerful, emotionally charged reference point that influences how listeners interpret everything that follows. By invoking the most notorious institutional failure of the last decade, Kennedy anchors the entire hearing within a frame of mistrust. Even if viewers do not fully agree with every insinuation he makes, the association between institutional opacity and political topics begins to solidify subconsciously. The impact of this technique is significant. It reshapes the narrative from a series of individual controversies into a unified worldview, one in which institutions systematically obscure truth, protect the powerful, and act in ways that contradict the public interest. Whether discussing a Wisconsin judge, FBI agents, intelligence officials, or Jeffrey Epstein, Kennedy presents each figure as part of the same overarching story. This creates the impression of continuity, a single, ongoing pattern of misconduct, rather than isolated events with different contexts and causes. In doing so, Kennedy not only reinforces his narrative, but also bypasses the need for detailed evidence. The emotional weight of Epstein's death fills in the gaps. Viewers may not recall the precise details of investigative reports, but they remember the public confusion, the memes, the jokes, the conspiracies, and the persistent suspicion. Kennedy weaponizes this collective memory, using it as a bridge to connect unrelated political grievances into a cohesive, emotionally charged argument. Ultimately, this segment reveals how political hearings can become platforms of narrative engineering rather than fact-finding. Kennedy's invocation of Epstein is less about the case itself and more about what the name represents: institutional failure, secrecy, and distrust. By merging these themes with the political issues at hand, he transforms a hearing into a story about a government that cannot be trusted unless forced to confront its own contradictions. There comes a moment in every ambitious person's life when they reach a silent threshold, a point where the past version of themselves is no longer capable of carrying them into the future they desire. This moment is rarely loud. It doesn't always arrive with drama, crisis, or visible turning points. Sometimes it comes quietly, disguised as a simple thought: there has to be more than this. Reinvention begins the moment you stop negotiating with the noise around you and start listening to the inner call that refuses to be silenced. It is the moment you accept that the path you walked so far was necessary, but not sufficient. And in that acceptance, something inside you shifts. You no longer see change as a threat, but as a declaration of possibility. Reinvention is not a rejection of who you used to be. It is an expansion. It is a conscious decision to edit your identity, just like an author edits their manuscript. Not because the old version was wrong, but because a better version is now possible. People often fear reinvention because they believe they must abandon everything familiar. But in truth, reinvention is about carrying forward the lessons and discarding only the limitations. You remove the parts of your identity that were built on fear, comparison, or survival, and replace them with parts shaped by vision, courage, and intention. Reinvention is not about changing your essence. It's about unlocking the parts of you that were buried beneath routine and doubt. Most people underestimate the emotional intensity of reinvention. The world teaches us how to chase goals, but rarely how to outgrow an identity. When you begin to change internally, the world may not immediately understand. Some people will applaud. Some will question you. Some will feel threatened because your evolution reminds them of their own stagnation. And some will simply drift away because your journey no longer aligns with their version of you. Reinvention demands that you become comfortable with being temporarily misunderstood. It is the price of becoming someone you've never been. But the truth is this: the people meant for your next chapter will not require you to shrink to be accepted. One of the most powerful aspects of reinvention is realizing that you don't need permission from society, family, friends, or your past self. You only need clarity. When you trust your vision, uncertainty becomes fuel rather than fear. You start noticing opportunities you previously overlooked. You begin to understand that the world doesn't reward the person who clings to who they were. It rewards the one who boldly steps into who they can be. Reinvention is a strategic act. It requires honest self-reflection, intentional discipline, and the courage to make decisions before you feel fully ready. Growth never waits for perfect timing. It begins the moment you choose movement over hesitation. In the process of reinventing yourself, you will meet new dimensions of your own strength. Challenges that once intimidated you will become stepping stones. Situations that once drained your energy will lose their power over you. You will stop operating from a place of proving and start operating from a place of becoming. And when this shift occurs, your life begins to reorganize itself around your new identity. Opportunities align, connections resonate differently, and your path becomes clearer. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger, more focused, and more aligned with your purpose. Reinvention is not a single event, but a continuous evolution. You will outgrow versions of yourself many times throughout your lifetime. Each transition will require new habits, new boundaries, new beliefs, and sometimes even a new environment. But the beauty of reinvention is that it compounds. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you raise your own standards. Every time you show resilience in the face of uncertainty, you strengthen your future identity. With each reinvention, you step closer to the highest expression of who you were always meant to be. And perhaps the most profound truth of all is this: you are allowed to become a different person without explaining it to anyone. You are allowed to rewrite your story even if the world has already read the earlier chapters. You are allowed to dream bigger than the limitations others placed on you. Reinvention is not betrayal. It is alignment. It is you finally recognizing that your life is not defined by who you were yesterday, but by who you choose to become today. There's a point in every transformation where inspiration is no longer enough. Motivation fades, excitement settles, and the initial spark that pushed you forward begins to lose its intensity. This is where most people quietly withdraw back into their old patterns. Not because they lack ambition, but because they never learned the discipline required to sustain evolution. The truth is simple. Becoming unstoppable has less to do with raw talent and more to do with consistent, deliberate choices made long after the feeling of motivation disappears. Discipline is the bridge between the person you are and the person you're trying to become. And without it, dreams collapse under the weight of their own potential. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction or punishment, but in reality, it is the highest form of self-respect. It is the decision to prioritize long-term outcomes over temporary comforts. When you commit to discipline, you are choosing to act in alignment with your future rather than your impulses. This shift is subtle yet revolutionary. Instead of asking, "What do I feel like doing right now?" you begin asking, "What would the future version of me thank me for?" That single question transforms your behavior, reshapes your routines, and elevates your standards. Discipline is not built in dramatic leaps. It is built in small, unglamorous, daily commitments that gradually sculpt a new identity. One of the hardest truths about becoming unstoppable is that you must learn to work even when you don't feel ready. Waiting for the perfect moment, perfect mood, or perfect conditions is a silent form of self-sabotage. Progress doesn't happen in ideal environments. It happens in real moments under imperfect conditions. The people who rise are not the ones who never face resistance. They are the ones who keep moving despite it. They show up when it's inconvenient. They push forward when excuses feel justified. They act on their goals even when their emotions try to negotiate them out of growth. This kind of discipline rewires your relationship with discomfort and turns it into a signal of progress rather than pain. Becoming unstoppable also requires emotional discipline, the ability to regulate your reactions, protect your energy, and separate temporary feelings from long-term intentions. You learn to stop giving your power away to frustration, comparison, or doubt. You begin to understand that not every emotion deserves a reaction, and not every thought deserves to be believed. Emotional discipline allows you to stay grounded when life becomes chaotic. It helps you navigate setbacks without collapsing into self-criticism. It teaches you how to respond with strategy rather than impulse. And slowly, you develop the inner stability that allows you to move forward with clarity even when the world around you feels uncertain. Another crucial aspect of becoming unstoppable is building systems that support your future identity. Willpower alone is unreliable. Even the strongest minds have moments of weakness. Systems, routines, habits, structures, and boundaries are what keep you aligned when motivation fades. A person with systems does not rely on inspiration to move. Their environment is engineered to produce consistency. Their habits are designed to make progress inevitable. Their boundaries protect their energy from unnecessary distractions. Their routines create momentum even on days when life feels heavy. Systems turn discipline into something sustainable, something that compounds quietly in the background until results become undeniable. Over time, this discipline transforms into confidence, not the loud, fragile confidence built on external approval, but the deep, unwavering confidence built on self-trust. When you consistently commit to your evolution, you begin to trust your ability to follow through. You stop doubting whether you are capable and start believing in your own resilience. Confidence becomes a byproduct of the promises you keep to yourself. And once you trust yourself, you become unstoppable. Not because life becomes easier, but because you now possess the strength, clarity, and commitment to navigate any challenge with intention. The discipline of becoming unstoppable is not about perfection. It is about persistence. It is about deciding that you are no longer available for the habits, excuses, or fears that kept you small. It is about showing up for yourself repeatedly until consistency becomes identity and identity becomes destiny. The most powerful transformations happen not in moments of inspiration, but in the quiet, consistent, disciplined choices that most people never see. And when you master this discipline, you unlock a version of yourself that no setback can diminish, no obstacle can break, and no circumstance